Heaven. We begin where human hope has always looked, upward. Heaven. The word alone carries the weight of 10,000 prayers. In Christianity, heaven, known in the New Testament as the kingdom of God, is described as a state of eternal communion with God. The Gospel of John speaks of many rooms in the Father's house. The book of Revelation paints vivid imagery of a new Jerusalem, streets of gold, and the complete end of suffering, mourning, and death. In Islam, the parallel concept is Jannah, derived from the Arabic word for garden. The Quran describes Jannah as a realm of lush gardens, flowing rivers of water, milk, honey, and wine that brings no harm, companionship, and an eternal life entirely free from pain. According to Islamic teaching, Jannah has multiple levels, with the highest, Firdaus, reserved for the most righteous. Crucially, in both traditions, heaven is not simply a destination, it is a relationship. The highest reward is described not as pleasure or comfort alone, but as the direct presence of God, what Christian theology calls the beatific vision, and what Islam describes as the supreme joy of seeing Allah.
A 2025 Pew Research study found that 67% of Americans say they believe in heaven, making it the single most widely held afterlife belief in the United States. Heaven answers one of our deepest moral needs, the conviction that goodness is not wasted, that kindness matters, that suffering is not the final word, hell. But if heaven represents divine reward, its counterpart has defined the moral imagination of the Western world for 2,000 years, hell. In Christianity, the concept of hell has evolved significantly across denominations and centuries. The word itself appears in English translations of the New Testament as a rendering of the Greek word Gehenna, a reference to a real valley outside Jerusalem that was used as a burning rubbish dump, later becoming a symbol of ultimate destruction. Catholic and many Protestant traditions describe hell as a state of eternal separation from God, a place of conscious torment for those who reject divine grace. In Islam, the equivalent is Jahannam. The Quran describes it in vivid, unflinching terms, a realm of fire, scorching winds, and the accursed tree of Zaqqum, whose bitter fruit is the food of the condemned. Islamic theology describes Jahannam as having 7 levels, each reserved for different categories of wrongdoing. However, it is important to note the diversity of interpretation here. Some Christian theologians, particularly in the Universalist tradition, argue that hell is not eternal, that ultimately a loving God will redeem all souls. Others hold that hell is real, but its population is not predetermined. And a growing body of modern Christian scholarship reads hell less as a physical location and more as a spiritual state, the self-chosen experience of a soul that refuses love. The same 2025 Pew study found that 55% of Americans believe in hell, notably lower than the 67% who believe in heaven, which itself reflects a long-standing trend in American religious polling. Hell, in its most profound interpretation, is not simply a divine punishment. It is an answer to the human demand for justice and a warning about the moral weight of every choice we make.
Purgatory. Between the perfect joy of heaven and the separation of hell, Roman Catholic Christianity proposes a third possibility, one defined not by punishment, but by transformation. Purgatory. The doctrine of purgatory holds that most souls who die in a state of grace, genuinely oriented toward God, but not yet fully purified, undergo a process of cleansing after death before entering the fullness of heaven. It is not a second chance for those who have rejected God. It is rather a merciful provision for those who are good, but not yet perfect. The Catholic Church formally defined purgatory at the Second Council of Lyon in 1274 and the Council of Trent in the 16th century. It draws on scriptural texts, including 2 Maccabees 12:46, which speaks of praying for the dead so that they might be freed from sin, and 1 Corinthians 3:15, which describes being saved, but only as through fire. The concept gave rise to the profound practice of praying for the dead, the idea that the living and departed exist in a community that transcends death itself. It is one of the most distinctly human of all religious beliefs, the refusal to simply abandon those we love when they die. Eastern Orthodox Christianity holds a related, though distinct concept, a state after death in which souls continue toward God, without using the term purgatory or the specific formulations of Catholic teaching. Protestantism, by contrast, largely rejects purgatory, insisting that salvation is entirely through faith and grace, completed at death. Purgatory reflects a belief in mercy that refuses to divide humanity into two neat categories of the perfectly good and the irredeemably lost, and suggests that transformation is possible beyond the grave.
Reincarnation. We turn now from the Abrahamic traditions to the religions that emerged from the Indian subcontinent and encounter a radically different vision of what death means. In the world's largest religions to teach reincarnation, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, death is not an end, it is a transition. Reincarnation, or samsara, is the belief that the essential self, whether called the Atman in Hinduism or more complexly understood in Buddhism, passes from one body to another after death, taking birth in a new form. The nature of that new life is shaped by karma, the accumulated moral weight of all one's actions, intentions, and thoughts across previous lives. In Hindu thought, a soul may be reborn as a human, an animal, or even in celestial realms, depending on the karmic account it carries. The Bhagavad Gita, one of Hinduism's most sacred texts, uses a famous metaphor. The soul sheds bodies as a person sheds worn-out clothes, taking up new ones in their place. Buddhism holds a more nuanced position. The Buddha himself was careful not to posit a permanent, unchanging soul that transmigrates. What continues from life to life is more like a stream of consciousness, a flame that lights another flame. The content of karma, the patterns of attachment and aversion, carry forward, but there is no fixed you that persists unchanged. The 2025 Pew Research Survey found that belief in reincarnation is not limited to practitioners of Indian religions. Significant minorities of Christians and people with no religious affiliation across multiple countries also report believing in reincarnation, suggesting this idea has taken root far beyond its original traditions. Reincarnation transforms death from a final verdict into a continuing education, a long journey whose destination is not the grave, but liberation.
Nirvana. If reincarnation is the journey, Nirvana is the destination in Buddhism, and it is unlike almost any other vision of ultimate fulfillment in the history of religion. Nirvana, from the Pali and Sanskrit word meaning extinguishing or blowing out, as one extinguishes a flame, is the Buddha's description of the end of the cycle of rebirth and suffering. It is not a place. It is not a reunion with God. It is not a heavenly garden. It is a state, the complete cessation of craving, aversion, and ignorance. The Buddha described three fundamental characteristics of existence that bind us to samsara: anicca, impermanence; dukkha, unsatisfactoriness or suffering; and anatta, the absence of a permanent self. Nirvana is the liberation that comes when we fully awaken to these truths and release our grip on all that we have falsely identified as ours. What remains is difficult to describe in human language, and the Buddha was often deliberately silent on what nirvana is, choosing instead to describe what it is not. Not birth, not becoming, not formed, not conditioned. Theravada Buddhism, the oldest surviving school, describes parinirvana, the final nirvana upon the death of an enlightened being, as the complete end of the cycle, beyond all further description. Mahayana Buddhism, the tradition that spread to East Asia, introduces the ideal of the bodhisattva,
an enlightened being who delays their own final nirvana in order to remain in the world and liberate all other sentient beings. Nirvana challenges Western assumptions about what salvation should look like. It offers not a continuation of the self, but its ultimate healing, the final peace that comes when there is no one left to suffer.
Moksha. In the Hindu tradition, the ultimate liberation from the cycle of rebirth carries its own name and its own profound meaning. Moksha. Liberation. Like nirvana, moksha represents the end of samsara, the end of the cycle of death and rebirth. But its character differs significantly from the Buddhist vision, depending on which of Hinduism's many philosophical schools one follows. In the school of Advaita Vedanta, associated with the philosopher Adi Shankaracharya, moksha is the realization that the individual self, the Atman, is identical with Brahman, the universal, infinite consciousness that underlies all reality. To achieve moksha is not to merge into something outside oneself, but to awaken to the truth that one always was Brahman. The illusion of separation, called Maya, dissolves, and the soul recognizes its own timeless nature. In the devotional tradition of Vaishnavism, moksha takes a different color. Here, the soul achieves liberation not through impersonal absorption, but through eternal loving relationship with the personal God, Vishnu or Krishna. The liberated soul dwells in Vaikuntha, the divine abode, in a state of perpetual blissful devotion. The paths to moksha are many. Jnana, the path of knowledge. Bhakti, the path of devotion.
Karma, the path of righteous action. And Raja, the path of meditation. Hinduism, unlike many other traditions, does not insist on a single road. Moksha reminds us that in the world's oldest living religious tradition, the deepest goal of human existence is not merely to be happy, but to understand who we truly are. Valhalla. We cross now to the frozen seas of Northern Europe and enter one of the most dramatic visions of the afterlife ever conceived. Valhalla. According to the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda, the medieval Icelandic texts that preserve the Norse mythological tradition, Valhalla, or Valhol in Old Norse, is a magnificent hall in Asgard, the realm of the gods. The Poetic Edda describes its rafters as spears, its roof as golden shields, and its walls hung with armor. It is ruled by Odin, the Allfather, who is sometimes called Valfother, father of the slain. Only warriors who die bravely in battle are eligible for Valhalla. After death on the battlefield, they are chosen by the Valkyries, Odin's female warrior messengers, and carried to this hall, where they join the Einhajar, the honored dead. There, each day, the Einhajar fight each other in endless combat, their wounds healing every evening.
Each night, they feast on the flesh of the magical boar Sehrimnir and drink mead from the great she-goat Hydrun. This is not leisure, it is preparation for Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Not all honorable dead went to Valhalla. According to the Eddas, the goddess Freya claimed half of those slain in battle for her own realm, Folkvanger. Those who died of old age, illness, or accident typically went to Hel, a gray, cold realm beneath the earth ruled by the goddess of the same name, daughter of Loki. Unlike the Christian Hel, this realm was not primarily one of torment, though it was considered less desirable. Valhalla reflects a culture that experienced constant danger and valued courage above all things. For Viking warriors, a brave death was not a tragedy, it was a victory. Their afterlife was not rest, it was purpose. Elysium. We travel now to ancient Greece, one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history, and discover a vision of paradise that influenced Western thought for millennia. Elysium,
or the Elysian fields. In ancient Greek religious belief, as described by Homer, Hesiod, Pindar, and Virgil, the afterlife was divided into distinct regions based not solely on virtue, but on divine favor and heroic achievement. Most souls, regardless of their moral character, ended up in the general realm of Hades, a shadowy, neutral existence beneath the earth. But Elysium, Elysion in Greek, was different. It was a blessed land, sometimes described as an island at the edge of the world, the Isles of the Blessed, reserved for heroes favored by the gods and those who had lived lives of exceptional virtue or divine connection. Here, according to Pindar's odes, the righteous enjoyed a life of ease, fair breezes, flowers, and eternal contentment. The great Greek heroes, Achilles, Menelaus, the demigod Heracles, were said to dwell here. Plato, in his dialogues, developed this tradition further, describing Elysium as the destination of those whose souls had been purified through multiple incarnations and who had demonstrated philosophical wisdom and moral excellence. Later Greek tradition also distinguished the asphodel meadows for ordinary souls, neither greatly good nor evil, and Tartarus, a place of deep punishment for the most wicked and for those who had offended the gods directly.
The judge, Rhadamanthus, and others evaluated the moral record of each soul upon arrival. In Elysium, we see one of humanity's earliest attempts to answer a moral question. Do good people and bad people simply go to the same place? The answer, for the Greeks, was no. And that answer has never stopped echoing. Hades. Elysium was for the exceptional. But for most of ancient Greece's inhabitants, death led somewhere else entirely. Hades. Hades is both the name of the Greek god of the underworld, the brother of Zeus and Poseidon, and the name of the realm he rules. Unlike the Christian hell, Hades in its most fundamental form is not a place of punishment. It is simply where the dead go. All of them. Heroes and cowards, saints and sinners, the wise and the foolish. In the Homeric tradition, Hades is described as a dim, joyless place beneath the earth, separated from the world of the living by the rivers Styx and Acheron. The souls of the dead, called shades, exist in a pale, weakened form, retaining the shape of their former selves, but without the vitality of life. Homer's Achilles, when visited in the underworld, says he would rather be a poor farmer's servant among the living than a king among the dead. Within Hades, distinct regions emerged in later tradition: Elysium for the blessed, Tartarus for the punished, the asphodel meadows for the ordinary, and the fields of punishment for the sinful. Souls were ferried across the Styx by the boatman Charon, provided they had been given a coin for passage, which is why the Greek dead were buried with coins on their eyes or in their mouths. Hades represents one of the most honest of all afterlife visions, a frank acknowledgement that death is strange, diminishing, and largely beyond human control. It is death not as reward or punishment, but as the unavoidable destination of everything that lives.
Sheol. In the ancient Hebrew texts that form the foundation of the Old Testament, the afterlife appears not as a place of reward or punishment, but as a dark and quiet gathering place for all the dead. Sheol. The word Sheol appears over 60 times in the Hebrew Bible. It is consistently described as a realm beneath the earth, dark, silent, and remote from God. The book of Psalms captures its character. The dead do not praise the Lord, nor do any who go down into silence. Ecclesiastes speaks of the dead with neither knowledge nor feeling in Sheol. Job, in his darkest moments, sees Sheol as a place of no return. Crucially, early Sheol is not divided by morality. The righteous and the wicked, the great and the humble, all descend to Sheol alike.
This reflects a stage in the development of Israelite thought before the full emergence of a belief in individual judgment and resurrection. However, Jewish thought did not remain static. By the period of the Second Temple, roughly 500 BCE to 70 CE, significant traditions emerged within Judaism describing resurrection, judgment, and rewards and punishments after death. The book of Daniel speaks clearly of a resurrection. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Modern Jewish belief on the afterlife is diverse. Orthodox Judaism affirms resurrection of the dead as a core doctrine. Reform and conservative branches often focus more on this life and legacy, with varying interpretations of what comes next. Sheol is a profound reminder that even within a single tradition, understandings of death have evolved across centuries, shaped by suffering, exile, and the unrelenting human hunger for hope.
Barzakh. In Islam, the moment of death is not the end of the soul's journey, nor is it immediately the beginning of final judgment. Between these two lies a period of waiting that Islamic theology calls Barzakh. The Arabic word Barzakh comes from Persian and means barrier, separation, or obstacle. In Islamic eschatology, it denotes the intermediate state between a person's death and the day of resurrection. According to the Quran, Surah 23:100 states that behind the deceased is a Barzakh until the day they are resurrected. During Barzakh, Islamic tradition teaches that the soul is questioned by two angels, Munkar and Nakir, who ask three fundamental questions. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? Who is your prophet? The experience of Barzakh following these questions depends on one's faith and deeds. The righteous experience what is called Tanim, a preview of the blessings of paradise. The wicked experience Azab al-Qabr, a foretaste of punishment. Importantly, Islamic teaching holds that no progress or correction is possible in Barzakh. Unlike the Catholic concept of purgatory, where purification continues, Barzakh is a holding state, not a place of growth. Whatever a person earned in their earthly life is sealed.
Barzakh creates a profound sense of continuity in Islamic thought. Death is not a blank void before judgment. The soul is immediately conscious, already beginning to experience the consequences of its life. Life after death begins the moment the last breath is taken.
The Day of Judgment. Of all the beliefs we examine tonight, none carries a more universal resonance across the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, than the belief in a final accounting, the Day of Judgment. In Islam, this day is called Yawm al-Qiyamah, the Day of Resurrection, or Yawm al-Din, the Day of Reckoning. It begins with the blowing of a great trumpet by the angel Israfil, at which all created beings die. A second blast resurrects them. Every human soul from every age of history is gathered on the plane of judgment. Each person is presented with their complete book of deeds, every action, word, and intention recorded with perfect accuracy. The scales are set. No intercession can alter what has been written, except by the will of God. In Christianity, the Day of Judgment, described most vividly in the Book of Revelation and the Gospel of Matthew, involves the resurrection of the dead and the separation of the righteous from the wicked. Matthew 25 presents one of the most moving descriptions. Those who fed the hungry, clothed the naked, and visited the sick and imprisoned are welcomed into eternal life, while those who ignored the suffering of others face condemnation. Judaism, in its rabbinic tradition, also affirms the resurrection of the dead and divine judgment, though with greater diversity of interpretation about its timing and nature. The Day of Judgment answers the moral question that haunts every human civilization. Do the powerful and cruel ever truly face consequences? For hundreds of millions of believers, the answer is yes, and that day is coming.
The ancestral spirit world. We turn now from the great literary traditions of the ancient world to the living spiritual traditions of Africa and discover a vision of the afterlife that refuses to sever the bond between the living and the dead. In many African traditional religions, from the Yoruba of West Africa to the Akan of Ghana to the Bantu-speaking peoples of Central and Southern Africa, death is not the end of a person's relationship with the community they lived in. Rather, the dead become ancestors, and ancestors are not gone. They are present. Among the Yoruba, the concept of Egungun embodies the ancestors as a collective spiritual force that can return to interact with the living through masked ceremonies. The Akans speak of the Saman, the spirit of the deceased, which, if properly honored, can become a protective presence for the family. Among Bantu-speaking peoples across the continent, the concept of ancestral veneration is the bedrock of religious life. The dead are consulted before major decisions. They are offered food, drink, and prayer. They are praised by name. The key distinction here from Western afterlife conceptions is radical. Death does not remove a person from the community. It changes their status within it. The dead become more powerful, more spiritually aware, intermediaries between the living and the ultimate divine reality. This belief shapes daily life. It shapes family structure. It shapes the way grief is processed and the way the elderly are treated. If your ancestors are watching, if they can intervene in your affairs, bless your crops, and protect your children, then how you honor them is not merely sentiment, it is necessity.
The Dreamtime. Australia's Indigenous peoples represent the oldest continuous living cultures on Earth, with spiritual traditions stretching back at least 65,000 years. Their understanding of death and the afterlife is unlike any other we have encountered tonight. The Dreaming, or Dreamtime. The word Dreamtime is an English approximation of concepts that vary across more than 250 distinct language groups. The Aranda people of Central Australia use the word Altiere, which some linguists suggest is closer in meaning to eternal or uncreated than to anything resembling sleep or dreams. As noted in sources from the Deadly Story Project, a platform built with and for Aboriginal communities, the dreaming is described as the foundation of all Aboriginal beliefs and law, the dimension in which creator spirits and ancestors reside, and to which human beings return when they pass away. The dreaming is not a past era. It is an ongoing reality. The ancestors who shaped the landscape, who became rivers, mountains, and rock formations through their journeys, are not absent. They continue to inhabit the land. The songlines that trace their paths across the continent are not merely geography. They are spiritual maps, alive with meaning and obligation. Death within this worldview is understood as a return.
As Australian Aboriginal religion scholar R.M.W. Dixon has documented, Aboriginal tradition holds that death is seen as part of a cycle of life in which one emerges from dreamtime through birth and eventually returns to the timeless, only to emerge again. Among the Walburi people, this life force, called Guruwari, returns to the land at death, where it waits to be reborn. Among other groups, the spirit of the deceased joins the ancestral realm and may communicate with the living through dreams. The Dreamtime offers perhaps the most radical alternative to individualistic afterlife visions. Not a personal heaven or personal hell, but a return to the sacred wholeness that underlies all of existence.
Tien and ancestor veneration. China has one of the longest and most complex religious traditions in human history. Its understanding of death and the afterlife reflects not a single coherent doctrine, but a rich interweaving of Confucian ethics, Taoist cosmology, Buddhist influence, and deep folk traditions that have persisted for thousands of years. At the center of traditional Chinese spiritual life is the concept of Tian, often translated as heaven, but more accurately understood as the cosmic moral order that governs all reality. For Confucius, Tian was the ultimate source of moral authority, the principle that human virtue reflects the order of the cosmos itself. Closely related is the practice of ancestor veneration, perhaps the most universal religious practice across Chinese history. The deceased do not simply disappear. They enter a structured spiritual realm that mirrors the social order of the living world. They continue to require nourishment, offered through paper money, food, and incense burned at graveside. They continue to have relationships with the families they belong to in life, and they continue to have power to bless, protect, and, if neglected, to withhold their favor. The annual Qingming Festival, Tomb Sweeping Day, remains one of the most widely observed events in China and among Chinese communities worldwide. Families visit graves, clean them, offer food, and burn incense. It is not mere tradition. For many families, it is an act of genuine relationship maintenance. Chinese Buddhism added its own layer, introducing the concept of the Pure Land, a Western paradise presided over by the Buddha Amitabha,
where devotees may be reborn after death and continue on the path to enlightenment. This Pure Land tradition became enormously popular across East Asia. Chinese afterlife belief reflects a worldview where the great chain of family, linking the living to the dead to the yet unborn, is the fundamental unit of moral reality. The spirit world. The Americas are home to hundreds of distinct indigenous nations, each with their own language, culture, and spiritual tradition. Any attempt to reduce these to a single Native American belief about the afterlife would be a profound distortion. What we can observe, however, are certain shared orientations that appear across many traditions. In many indigenous traditions of North America, the afterlife is understood as a spirit world, a realm that coexists with the physical world rather than replacing it. The Lakota speak of Wanagi Makoche, the land of the spirits. The Ojibwe tradition describes a journey westward along a path after death to a land where the spirit continues to live, meeting ancestors and loved ones who have gone before. The Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, hold that the soul travels on a path of stars, what European observers came to call the Milky Way, on its way to the land of the dead. In many Mesoamerican traditions, including the Aztec and Maya, the afterlife was not determined by moral virtue alone, but by the circumstances of one's death. Warriors who died in battle, women who died in childbirth, and those struck by lightning were believed to receive honored destinations. The Aztec underworld of Mictlan required a soul to travel through 9 levels over 4 years, guided by offerings from the living, before reaching its final rest. Across many of these traditions, the connection between the living and the dead remains active. The Day of the Dead, observed across Mexico and Central America, reflects an ancient belief that the boundary between the living and the spirit world grows thin on specific days, allowing the dead to return and share in the warmth of family once more. These beliefs remind us that across the Americas, death was never simply an ending. It was a transformation, a passage into a world that the living remain responsible for honoring and maintaining. Oblivion. We have traveled through visions of paradise and punishment, liberation and reunion. Now, we come to a belief held by hundreds of millions of people around the world, one that many find not terrifying, but honest. Oblivion, the complete cessation of consciousness at death. The philosophical tradition of materialism, most fully developed in the modern era, but anticipated by ancient thinkers,
including the Greek philosopher Epicurus, holds that the mind is a product of the brain, and that when the brain ceases to function, consciousness ceases as well. There is no soul, no continuation, no judgment. There is simply the end. Epicurus, writing in the 3rd century BCE, famously argued that this realization should bring not terror, but peace. When I am, death is not come. When death has come, I am not. Therefore, death is nothing to me. The symmetry he pointed to, that we were unconscious before birth and felt no distress about it, should, he argued, be our guide to the unconsciousness after death. The 2025 Pew Research Center study found that in Sweden, only 38% of adults believe in an afterlife, the lowest rate among the 36 countries surveyed.
Universal salvation. We close our journey with a vision that refuses the finality of both hell and oblivion, one that looks at every human soul and insists, none of you are lost forever. Universal salvation, apokatastasis, the ultimate reconciliation of all things. The belief in universal salvation, the theological conviction that all souls will ultimately be redeemed and restored to harmony with God, has roots that go back to the early Christian theologian Origen of Alexandria, writing in the 3rd century CE. Origen argued that since God is infinite love and infinite power, and since the soul retains free will even after death, there is no logical point at which God's redemptive work must stop. Ultimately, every soul, even the most darkened, will return to its source. This teaching was condemned at the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 CE, but it never fully disappeared. It resurfaced in theologians such as Gregory of Nyssa in the 4th century, who wrote that God's love would eventually draw all into unity. In the modern era, it is associated with theologians such as Karl Barth, Thomas Talbot, and David Bentley Hart, whose 2019 book That All Shall Be Saved made a rigorous philosophical and theological case for universal reconciliation. Related ideas appear in other traditions. In Sufism, the mystical tradition within Islam, the poet Rumi wrote of a love so vast that it cannot be contained by any doctrine of exclusion. Some Kabbalistic Jewish thinkers hold that all souls carry a divine spark and will ultimately return to their source. In certain Hindu traditions, the cycle of reincarnation itself is seen as God's patient process of bringing every soul toward liberation,